Hey everybody, it is great to be back. I'm with my good friend, Dr. Bruce Kehr. Hello, Bruce.
Hello, Dr. J. How are you?
I'm doing well, my friend. I'm doing well. It's a Friday. It's been a great week, and I'm looking forward to the weekend. How about yourself?
Same thing.
Good, 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 good. So we've had some great conversations, and we decided that today what we were going to do is talk about the mental and physical effects of leadership and how leaders have stress in their lives, both mental, emotional, physical stresses. And we're going to have a conversation about kind of what those challenges are, as well as what are some evidence-based solutions around overcoming those challenges. So thanks so much for joining me.
Sure, my
So if you wouldn't
pleasure.
mind just, so if you wouldn't mind just starting us off and telling us, I know you treat a lot of leaders around the world. And so maybe just tell us a little bit about that and some of the challenges that you see, as well as specifically your solutions.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity, Jay. It's always fun talking with you. In thinking about this, there are a number of different kinds of leaders. A stay-at-home mom or dad, they have a lot of leadership responsibility. Someone who runs a foundation or a charity. Someone in politics. We probably should stay away from that.
Well, I'll
Right
tell you, the
now.
politicians are giving me mental health issues, Bruce. That's the problem.
Right, we have a lot of people coming in who are very stressed about the political situation.
Yeah,
And then, of course, there are business leaders. So if it's all right with you, today we can focus on business leadership.
perfect, perfect.
Great. So if I think about the emotional challenges of being a leader in business, what I come back to is what we might call the four pillars of happiness and what happens. So as we think of the four pillars of happiness, they are family, finance, fitness, certainly you know a lot about,
Mhm.
and fun. And so if we look at each of those in the context of the emotional stress of being a business leader, and we start with family, what immediately comes to mind is the competing pressures between family life and business life. And how does one balance that? And sometimes, a wife or a husband of someone who is in business talk about how they feel like, the business is like a mistress or a lover.
Yeah,
And, who comes first, me or the business? Who is loved more?
sure.
And, sometimes business leaders are obsessed with their business to the exclusion of their family. That's a big, big challenge. The second issue is when someone is running a business, there are many financial pressures as well, particularly if a business is leveraged, if it's borrowed, significant amounts of money. And so those financial pressures can take a toll. They can bring about anxiety and depression, particularly when business is down or there's a lot of competition, rapid technological change, competitors who have an edge. Venture-backed businesses wonder, will I get refinanced?
Hmm.
How do you manage competition and growth? There are many, many emotional challenges in running a business. And at the same time, how do you provide financial stability at home? We're trying to provide financial stability for the business. Then with the
Hmm.
third pillar, which relates a lot to what you all deal with, and I want to come back to that, is fitness and health. When people are on the road, they eat poorly. They don't sleep well. They don't work out. There are probably a lot of stress-related injuries that you might talk about for these road
Hmm.
warriors or people who
Yeah,
work 12, 14, 16 hours a day. And then finally, we get to the fourth pillar of happiness, which is fun. And not uncommonly, business leaders say to me, well, who has time for that? I don't have time for fun. So those are what comes to mind in terms of the four pillars of happiness, and then how business leadership can negatively impact those four areas of life
and
and
so
result in anxiety and depression.
sure, sure. And so, what are some of the tricks of the trade that you share with your clients? And I know, of course, everybody's different, every situation is different, but what are some of the solutions you have to these challenges that you've just described?
Well, this may be somewhat of an oversimplification, Jay, but I think the main solution to the challenges of being a business leader is to find more love in your life. How do you have more love at home? How do you have more love with your significant other? How do you have more love with your friendships and children? If you have children, and really putting in the time and energy and effort into those relationships that you would into building a business, because without that, it becomes very lonely, very empty, very depressing, very anxiety provoking, and very challenging. I think that's number one. Number two, when you're traveling, I don't really buy it that it's so hard to stay on a healthy diet. How hard is it when you go to a restaurant to have, broiled lean meat or fish and vegetables
Sure.
and a salad? It's really
Sure.
not so hard. Or to take on the plane, some healthy snacks that you can pick up in, one of the vendors in the airport. It's really not so hard. And pretty much every hotel nowadays has at least some exercise equipment. So if you get up 20, 30 minutes early and work out in the morning before your meetings, you're going to be more effective.
No question.
And then, of course, trying to get enough sleep. So even if you travel the West Coast, the 3 hours behind, try to go to bed at the same time that you would here on the East Coast. Very simple, basic rules and principles.
That's right. So what I'm hearing is love, nutrition, and sleep to help really address some of these challenges that leaders face.
Right.
I really love the component of love, actually, because when I think about not only my relationships outside the business, I also think about my relationships inside the business. People in my organization where before I get a phone, I'll be like, love ya. And I do. Like, I love these people.
Well, and you just gave an example before we started today. You have an employee who just had heart surgery, and you want to let everyone know in your organization that that person is doing well, that they got through the surgery and they're recovering well. That's a sign of loving and caring about your employees. And I completely agree with you that your employees, if you nurture them and care about them and you are concerned about their development, they will give back a lot to you as well.
Sure. And also it's just fulfilling to have these types of relationships. Like I want to, we work really hard in healthcare, as you know, and we have a big responsibility in taking care of patients, and it can be very, very stressful. And then there's all the changes and challenges related to what's going on in healthcare today, and certainly on the political spectrum as well. And, at the end of the day, I want to work with people that actually I care about and care about me. And so it just becomes a very rewarding thing, aside from just the productivity thing. It just becomes very rewarding when I get to work with people that I actually really care about, enjoy, respect, love. It makes all the difference in the world for me.
Mm-hmm. Well, what are some of the challenges that you see in terms of the physical manifestations of leadership?
So I think for me, there's really two key areas, and they're interrelated. The first area is that people ignore their pain. So they have pain, they don't make enough time for addressing the symptoms, and in many situations, very simple problems become very chronic and very complicated. And the scientific evidence is really clear. The clinical practice guidelines, which is the highest level of scientific clinical evidence that's out there, they're very, very clear. The cost data is clear. The earlier the intervention, the easier it is to take care of that particular musculoskeletal condition. And I would use the analogy of like a cavity. You get a little ache in your tooth, maybe when you have a really cold drink and it's a little cavity. And so if you go to the dentist to get it fixed, it's not a big deal. But if you don't do anything about that cavity, it becomes, a root canal or the tooth falls out or what have you. Musculoskeletal pain, and certainly chronic pain is a $600 billion problem. Musculoskeletal pain is a $200 billion problem in this country alone. We have an opioid crisis in this country. And so how patients and leaders specifically make time to not ignore pain, but to address pain is really important. That's really the first thing. And the second thing is posture. How are you, if you have good posture, if you learn good
sit up then.
If you learn good and practice good postural skills and how you perform your activities of daily living, for instance, don't bend over at the waist when you need to pick up your kid. Bend your knees. Or a pen. bend your knees, use your legs, use proper squat mechanics. If patients or leaders would just really pay attention to their posture, that would make such a huge difference. So right now I'm talking to you, the computer, the middle of the screen is at eye level for me. I'm not looking down, which means my cervical curve is in a normal position. It's in the position that it's supposed to be. If I was looking down at the laptop, I would reduce the cervical curve. That would create stress on my muscles. It would shorten the muscles in the front of my neck. It would weaken them and deactivate the muscles in the back of my neck. It would create stress on the discs of my cervical spine, my neck. And so posture plays a really, really important role. So it's really not ignoring pain and making sure that you practice good postural techniques. So what happens when you address pain correctly? What does that look like? Well, for musculoskeletal conditions, it's pretty basic as well. It's normalizing range of motion to the joints that are affected, normalizing the soft tissues to ensure they're at the appropriate length so that they're not too tight or they're not too long, and then teaching muscles how to activate to stabilize and support whatever structure is injured or damaged. So it could be the neck, it could be a knee, it could be an elbow. It's really all the same. It's the basic fundamentals: range of motion, appropriate flexibility, and then appropriate muscle tone and strength to make sure that those areas are being supported and stabilized. And when it comes to good posture, there's lots of great resources out there, but really it's about making sure that it's aligned. So it's ears over shoulders, shoulders over hips in the seated position, the knees and elbows bent at 70 to 90 degrees. And when you're standing, a good posture looks like head up. If you keep your head up, your ears are over your shoulders are over hips are over your knees are over your ankles. Pretty simple stuff. And then the last postural tip that I mentioned earlier, but for point of emphasis, it's really important that you follow the appropriate rules when bending and lifting. So it's get close to the object, bend your knees all the way, and make sure you keep the object closed when you lift. Alone can prevent patients from having not only moderate or mild back pain, but it really can prevent them from herniating a disc in their lower back, which is a much more complicated low back issue. Kind of the tricks of the trade, and manage something early. Don't let it become chronic. Watch your posture, and the odds of you having a musculoskeletal problem dramatically drop.
Well, it's really great advice. If you think of the challenges of the business traveler with suitcases and all the lifting and turning and twisting involved in putting them in the overhead compartment or putting them on the conveyor belt, that's really, really good advice. And the same aspect of early intervention applies here. If a person begins to get depressed, anxious, begins to get suicidal feelings over how things are going in their business, getting help early really makes a difference in terms of accelerating recovery.
That's such a great point, Bruce. And what's so interesting is that you and I have had conversations about the scientific literature, and we know that patients who have chronic pain become depressed. And we also know that patients who are depressed can have a greater likelihood of having low back pain.
That's correct.
So those two things are interrelated. So if we manage their health, both from a mental and physical aspect, and they're going to be able to perform as leaders so much better.
Well, you make a lot of sense, as always, Dr. J. It's great talking to you again.
As do you. Well, it's great talking to you, Bruce, and I'm sure we'll do this again soon. Thanks so much for spending time with us today, and we look forward to talking soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.